from TheMossShow.com. This is Hilton Giesno bringing you episode 10 of The Moss Show. I guess it's a bit of a mini milestone in shows. I certainly wasn't sure it'd get to this many shows when I first started, and I've run out of fingers to count on now, so we'll see if any more shows do come out. Actually, the next episode should be an interview with some of the SharePoint product team members to discuss the new SharePoint administration toolkit I mentioned at the beginning of last show, so let's hope it does come out quite soon. We had a slight delay with getting the actual recording time set up with everybody, so it might be a little bit later than usual coming out, but keep an eye on the Twitter feed for updates, and that's at twitter.com/TheMossShow. And as usual, if you want to send any feedback to the show, then you can contact me at feedback@TheMossShow.com, and it'd be great to start reading them out on air. So if you are so inclined, please feel free to send us an email. One great initiative I want to pimp this week is the guidance wiki that the information worker community here in South Africa has been working on. It's just gone live recently at www.informationworker.co.za or ZA, and then click on the link at the top, I Wanna Be, and it's a wiki dedicated to the various roles in building and running a SharePoint project. So there's a section dedicated to each role, like power user, WCM expert, trainer, and architect. And the guys have put some great resource together, so go ahead and check that out. And it's a good resource to send other people to as well. With that, let's get back to this week's episode. We've had Joel Oleson, also known as SharePoint Joel, on the show in the Tech Ed Architecture panel already. But this is a dedicated show, just me and him discussing how to prepare yourselves for SharePoint 2010. I pulled Joel away from dinner with Eric Harlan and Zlatan Djinic while he was down here visiting in Cape Town, and we had some high tea in the library at a really nice hotel nearby, so it's a little more noisy than usual, and you can even hear the odd teacup sound in the background for added effect. So let's go ahead and roll the interview.
I was proud and I was standing. I was lost in a crowd. Now this room is abandoned. Everybody keep on fading out.
So I'm sitting here with Joel Oleson. Joel has very kindly taken another hour out of his leave time, his holiday time here in South Africa, to spend some time talking with us about some upgrading options in SharePoint, specifically around, of course, looking forward to 2010, but we'll talk a little bit about 2003 upgrading as well. So Joel, thanks for coming and spending your this extra hour of your holiday with us. But before we jump in, maybe tell us a little bit about some of the time that you spent in South Africa and some of the things you had a chance to see. Let people know some of the good things that they don't see on the news maybe about South Africa.
It's been an amazing trip. I've been here in South Africa for about 2 weeks. We spent a few days in Kruger, which is this wild animal park that's huge. I mean, I bet it's as big as one of the states in the United States. It's so massive. We spent 3 days just driving through it, going from camp to camp to camp. And in the road we would see elephants or giraffes or all sorts of different buffalo. And it wouldn't just be one, it would be herds of impala or herds of buffalo. And troops of monkeys and baboons, and man, it was just this amazing experience.
So not one of them was a SharePoint developer, hey? So that was a change.
Didn't have any problems with any SharePoint going on while we were there.
Wow, that's great. And it's you've got to kind of catch the right time of day as well to see the right kind of animals. So you were obviously doing some early mornings, some late night, a bit of everything.
We had a mix of everything, from night safaris to morning walks, tracking down rhinos with big guns and not shooting them, but avoiding the shooting, just getting as close as we could without making the rhinos too upset.
Okay. Did you have any particular interesting stories?
The rhino was an interesting one where we were creeping up on him and it started stomping, and he had us kind of back up a little bit. And with the elephants, we saw so many elephants there, but there were a couple times where we were trying to get close and get a bunch of pictures, and the elephant noticed us and would come out into the road, and we had to back up real quick. We were trying to get it backed up, and as he was kind of stomping after us.
Yeah, we all drive, what do you call it? I think you call it stick. We drive.
Stick shift.
So you're the guys obviously changing moving that stick pretty quickly into
with the other hand.
Yeah.
That's the tough part.
Yeah. Wow, that's great. And then I think you saw some interesting Swazi dances as well in Swaziland.
Oh yeah, we had a really cultural experience too. We went into Mozambique one day, went into Swazi one day, and danced around the fire.
Okay. Yeah, we're going to have to point people at that YouTube video.
Oh, definitely.
Joel going native.
That's right.
So to speak. Wow, that's great. And then obviously there was TechEd as well. So that was, the normal TechEd South Africa, but, giving the presentations and being part of the conference there as well.
Yeah, TechEd Africa was my first one here in Africa. But as well, it's my fifth TechEd on a unique continent, I've been to some in the U.S. and Europe and Asia, multiple ones in Asia and Australia and New Zealand. So it was really cool to go to TechEd Africa and to really get to know the locals and see how you guys do it here.
Yeah. Do you find differences between the TechEds?
Yeah.
Maybe specifically between the attendees or between the organization, things like that?
Yeah, I think one of my favorites is the one in Malaysia. It didn't happen this year, which is kind of disappointing. But I've been there three years in a row. It's just like my favorite. They have the speaker parties are so amazing. Where they had, like last year, they had an MC. They had these drinking games, and they go wild.
And that's just for the speakers.
That party is for the speakers.
Okay, wow.
Yeah.
Okay, I got to check that one out. And the speakers, we basically just got a room where we can be a bit more quiet.
Right.
What kind of attendance do they have there, though? Relative? Is it enough?
A couple thousand, yeah. A couple thousand attendees in
great.
TechEd, Southeast Asia.
And then since we finished up TechEd, you've been spending some time here in Cape Town, which is definitely the more beautiful side of.
I totally agree with you. I find Cape Town just is this beautiful kind of garden with the prairies, and it totally reminds me of home in Idaho.
Yeah.
Very natural with the mountains and the water. Much more water than Idaho has, but
we've got an ocean.
Yeah, the oceans are nice. With the capes, we saw an ostrich near the beach.
Okay.
Which kind of blew my mind as well, seeing an ostrich running down the beach.
It's also getting his tan in for the morning.
Yeah, the little penguins. Oh, love the penguins. That just reminds me that, hey, it's just Antarctica right over there.
Yeah, not far.
Not too far.
And then yesterday you did the world famous shark diving as well. So you actually went diving with the great predators.
Yeah, great white sharks, huge ones, and getting in the water with them in a cage.
Yeah.
Still, it's not much to put your hand through there on accident or foot or whatever.
I mean, you're in a cage, but he's still. I mean, those are powerful beasts. You don't want to.
Man, they're powerful.
As you say, you don't want to stick out an elbow accidentally. You'll come away with one elbow less.
It's just wild. Getting that close to nature with these massive beasts with the huge teeth, and you can't experience that kind of thing elsewhere. To get that close to something that's that big and fierce.
Yeah, it's just raw power, eh?
Yeah, massive.
Not quite the same power as a sort of a 16-core processor.
It's very kind of humbling that there's other creatures on this world.
Yeah, very much. And and then today was SharePoint Saturday as well.
SharePoint Saturday, Cape Town. Yeah.
Yeah, we had some good reports. The guys apparently enjoyed it quite a bit.
I had a great time as well. Being able to connect, kind of get that user group feel, but as well, you could see how dedicated the people were here to really just thirsting for knowledge, and I love that. I really kind of tap into that.
Yeah, we're a little bit geographically isolated, I guess. Our neighbours, there's not a lot of IT going on in the neighbouring countries, not to the same extent. If you're in a particular state in the US, you go over to the other state and, there's stuff going on there. So it means that people here tend to be a little bit more jack of all trades. They've got, they have to kind of figure things out a little bit more for themselves, and I think it makes them a little bit hungrier, a little bit more eager as well. So.
I met a guy from Nambia on the TechEd bus, and I was just fascinated by his experience. Microsoft guy from Nambia, and he covered 5 different countries that were kind of similar to your neighbors. That you don't know that there's a lot going on, but it's it's mining and governments and he's got to cover so much when just very, very thin, you know.
Yeah, thin on the ground.
Trying to cover everything that Microsoft has. I can imagine.
Yeah, it's a different kind of experience.
Oh yeah.
Okay, so let's jump into talking a bit more about SharePoint. Back from the sharks and the lions and the tigers. Obviously, 2010 is on everyone's minds at the moment. Everybody's keen to hear what's coming out and what pieces and what bits and what new features and things like that. And unfortunately, you can't talk too much about them just yet.
That's right.
I'm sure you've got some inside knowledge you're bursting to share, but we'll have to hold that back for now. Of course, we're hoping to get some more content on that coming out on the podcast soon. We're lining up some cool interviews for that. But in the interim, I think there's a lot of things that people can do to start making sure that the environment is ready to upgrade. You mentioned to me just before we started that you've been upgrading people from a version of SharePoint to the next version for a couple of versions now for a good few years. So you've learned some good lessons on what people need to do. So maybe kick us off with that.
So I've been working on upgrades with SharePoint since 2001. Working with Andrew Daters on Spin and Spout. I helped him do the betas of Spin and Spout, which were the 2001 to 2003 tools for importing and exporting your data. And on the SharePoint Team Services stuff, working with Gabe Bratton in the product team around how you could migrate your databases and run Smigrate. Used to run the betas of Smigrate for upgrading to that for V1 of STS to get your stuff to the WSS 2.0, where you could then get the recycle bin. So that was exciting stuff.
And then, so going forward now, 2007, I guess, going forward to 2010, we got some newer tools.
Yeah, the things I really always tap into is, in the previous version, there was this pre-scan tool. And the pre-scan tool was very, very important for you to be able to run and give you some insights on your data, and it would kind of get everything ready. And I was telling people in the previous version around that pre-scan tool, they needed to run it often.
So that was a 2003 to 2007.
That's right.
A 2003 tool, I guess. Effectively planning for a 2007 upgrade.
So with 2007 to 2010, we now have a new tool in Service Pack 2 called the Pre-Upgrade Checker. And this Pre-Upgrade Checker, another STS ADM command. I guess pre-scan was actually a different binary. But this one is actually a -O pre-upgrade check. So it's actually an operation built right into STS ADM that shipped with Service Pack 2. And the insight that tool gives you, it's much more health related. There's a whole section on information about your farm, like alternate access mappings, like the topology, the servers in your farm, the SSP, and any search databases, and the index. It gives you your size. There's a ton of good metrics in there around site collections and sites and web applications. But more and more I see this as not just the information. There's all that stuff that actually tells you about things you're missing, missing features, missing site definitions. A ton of insight around, are you ready? Is your operating system ready? And that's part of that insight around preparing is, are you really ready? Because you need to do things to ensure that your environment is ready for upgrade.
Okay, so can you give us some examples? I mean, I guess 64-bit is one of those, maybe.
And I
throw you out for that. But
yeah, and I think that 64-bit, a lot of people are kind of misunderstanding that it's 64-bit hardware. But even if you're doing an image, it needs to be a 64-bit image. And even for developers, they need to be thinking about, hey, if the developer is going to have a developer desktop, they need to have 64-bit as well. So when you're seeing that SharePoint code, it needs to be 64-bit hardware and 64-bit OS. Mm-hmm. And the OS for SharePoint needs to be Windows Server 2008. Could be R2 or the release of Windows Server 2008. But it needs to be that at least.
So guys can start prepping by just getting familiar with those tools as well. I mean, you can install
Definitely.
2003, I guess. Possibly. I actually haven't checked that, but certainly 2007 you can run on Windows 2008, but it'll give you a chance to get familiar with 2008 SQL.
And there's a new kind of administration experience even in just 2008, and there are resources on running SharePoint with IIS 7 and Windows Server 2008 and some of the new features that come with IIS 7.
Mm-hmm. So IIS 7 itself is a pretty big change depending on what
sure.
you do.
It definitely is, and it's important for admins to kind of ramp up on a lot of the insight and troubleshooting that comes with Windows Server 2008 and IIS 7. A lot easier to debug, but you need to understand how to do it. Being able to troubleshoot memory issues and things like that become much easier in Windows Server 2008 with IIS 7.
Can you give some ideas, some examples there?
The worker processes themselves can actually be, you can, essentially it's almost like a profiler. You can crack it open and see exactly what it's doing and what's taking time. In IIS 7, you can essentially turn those things on. It's some knobs around it to be able to flip it on and say, I want to analyze this process, or run the debugger essentially around that process. There's extensive logging around it as well.
It's on the tip of my tongue to start asking you 2010 questions, but I'm trying actively to avoid it. Let's maybe go back to the upgrading tools. There was some guidance around the tools in the 2003 days, the upgrade tools there, that were actually saying, you should try and run these tools on a semi-regular basis, not quite on a daily basis, but pretty regularly, because they gave you a very good overview of the health of your environment across the board. It sounds like the same is true for the tools now in Service Pack 2 of 2007. And
I would say even more so. The pre-upgrade check itself, when you look at the logs, you can see that it's actually based on a best practices analyzer.
Oh, okay.
That it's essentially, a lot of this 2010 upgrade stuff is rules that are looking at your lists. They're looking at your, seeing if there's orphan sites, and seeing if your data is aligned properly, and helping you analyze it. One particular scenario is alternate access mappings. The knowledge of what your alternate access mappings are, that's a pretty serious thing to document. If you lose your config database, those are gone, essentially. Think about that for a second.
Okay.
So if you've got a new config database, you need to put in your alternate access mappings again. Who's documenting those things so that you get them the same way that they were before? Mm-hmm. Well, if you run this check, it actually lists them out quite clearly in a nice HTML page that you can read. These are your web applications, and these are alternate access mappings for them. One of the other flags in there is you can run it. The default is to run it for the whole farm, but you can actually force it to go local only. So you could actually run this pre-upgrade checker on each server in your farm, and it can tell you what features have been installed, what's missing, what site definitions it's dependent on, alternate access mappings, and all this information, including OS, the 64-bit stuff. And what you'll find is everything you think you know, there's going to be things you're going to find, like missing features. It's going to be much more common than you think. When
you're saying missing features, are you saying something you thought you'd installed that didn't get installed, or something that, say, you've got multiple front ends? You're saying that it installed on one or two of them, but not the rest, something like that.
It's a mix of all of the above. But as well, I think people are going to find that when they first installed SharePoint over here, and then they built the new farm, and they wanted to do it clean, they started from scratch, and they missed a language pack, or they missed a site template, or they missed a feature. And these features may have come from the Fabulous 40. But that report's going to list out, hey, if you were to upgrade this, these sites that are dependent on this feature would fail upgrade. So it's a very critical thing for you to know these dependencies, and essentially it's kind of listing out these dependencies in this report.
And are there any dependencies on the database or database version or anything like that it would highlight?
When we talk about SQL's version does need to be SQL 2008 or 2005. That's definitely another piece to call out on the system requirements. And as well, though, SQL needs to be 64-bit, and I think a lot of people are kind of missing that piece as well. Because a lot of the times we talk about the SharePoint piece. Well, SQL needs no support for SQL 2000 and no support for 32-bit on SQL, which a lot of people would say, well, why do you care? Well, that's what it's tested on, and that's also what the product team is looking to ensure that the performance recommendations and everything they're planning on providing sync up, with what they're saying.
Yeah, so SharePoint's built to it's attuned for a certain configuration to some extent. So to come back a sec, just looking at SQL versions, 64 is obviously, as you mentioned, an important recommendation, 64-bit over there as well. We can talk publicly, because I know it's been announced quite a lot that that SharePoint 2010 will only run on 64-bit hardware, on 64-bit OS. But are there any requirements for SQL 2008 only upwards, or
2005 or 2008? Yeah.
Okay, so
there's support for 2005.
I squeezed something 2010 related out of John. So we've got some other topics. So, you wanted to talk a little bit about failed deployments, but before we leave the upgrading, are there any other key things that are worth mentioning, worth highlighting?
Yeah. Had some discussion with developers recently around custom site definitions. That's always been kind of the sore point between IT and developers, and there's always this ongoing debate of, are site definitions just an evil thing, or are they necessary in some circumstances? Putting that debate aside, if you've got custom site definitions, this pre-upgrade checker is going to identify them. It's one of those things where you do want to identify them early, because you need a config XML. And when you run your pre-upgrade checker, it's an important input to say, include this config XML in my upgrade check, so that it's aware of these custom site definitions and their schemas. So essentially, the sooner you can do this, the better. But basically, if you've got custom site definitions, you need to contact those developers that wrote them,
and hopefully still
and track them down to get a web. The couple developers I was talking to today were saying, "Oh yeah, anytime we do a custom site definition, we're providing a config XML." And I don't think many of the IT guys realize that. But as well, it's a really good exercise around, is what the developers are handing you supportable? And are they looking to the future and saying, here's what you're going to need when it's time to upgrade? Because not only is it important for that pre-upgrade check, it's going to be important for the upgrade as well.
So what are the key questions would an administrator be needing to ask his development team or his vendor, development supplier?
Well, talking about the development team, it simply is a config XML. The product itself comes with two, one for WSS and one for SharePoint Server, that kind of just defines the schema of those in-the-box site definitions. But anytime it's provided by a developer, they essentially need to provide a config XML that describes those custom site definitions. And what is important to understand as well is if it is simply a copy of an out-of-the-box site definition, then maybe it is as simply as copying some of those config XMLs and just changing the names where appropriate.
And in terms of things like features, WSPs, things like that, are there anything?
I think there's some lessons learned as well around that when you start tracking down, you run your pre-upgrade scan, you start making a copy of your environment. I see that as a real takeaway from the talk I've been doing is people today need to start creating Hyper-V copies of their environment running on Windows Server 2008 so that they can experience these are all the dependencies on my farm, and here's the features, here's the solutions. Oh, and by the way, here's a couple loose ones. We need to package these up so that when we build our new farms, we have, these are the 4 packages or these are the 5 packages that we install when we create a new farm.
Okay, so DRP, I guess, always boils down to how can you actually do your recovery.
What are your true dependencies on your farm?
How often are you actually testing that you can get everything back up and running?
Right. And it is that challenge of if you had a clean configuration database, could you recreate everything? Could you just attach your content databases and be able to configure your farm in a moment's notice?
We had a chat with on the podcast with Sahil Malik recently. He's more on the development side, obviously,
Sure.
of SharePoint, and he raised a good point as well, which is if you haven't listened to that show, it's worth listening to, but worth bringing up here again. Is he was saying developers often put, when they're doing upgrade packages, they'll version 4, version 5 we gave as the example. They'll make sure they upgrade to version 5 upgrades cleanly from version 4, but they don't always plan what happens if you go from a clean environment and you now roll out the version 5. Does it gracefully upgrade from 0 to 5 instantly?
That's a really good point. And I think that testing is one of those lacking areas of how does it roll out clean, and what happens if you do have to reinstall something. There's enough scenarios that people don't plan for testing resources, and things may get tested once before they run to production, and it's unfortunate. They find these things in production.
Do you see any challenges in virtualization versus bare metal hardware? Are there any situations you've encountered where virtualization doesn't give you what you need?
I think that there are cases where people have underestimated the manageability aspects of it. They think that it's going to be easier to manage because it's a virtual. And I think there are benefits it brings in terms of rollback and roll forward and some of those kind of features in terms of it being an image. But the other parts of it they don't realize is you still have to manage the hotfixes, you still have to manage the page file, you still have to manage the memory, you still have to manage the applications that are on that box. It's essentially still a box, even though it's just not physical hardware. You still have to manage the drivers and Windows hotfixes, IS hotfixes, SharePoint hotfixes, and so on to keep that thing up to date. Still needs to be backed up.
Yeah.
Don't forget to back it up just because you can save system state or whatever. No, you still need to back that thing up.
It's still a running machine of some sort.
And there's still data on there, still configuration settings, and still system state that's important on there.
Okay, yeah, we tangented. I don't know if that's a word, but we took a tangent into the virtualization because we were talking about it with the DRP. But I guess that's really where I was going with the question. Do you see any problems with doing DRP in virtual if it doesn't match? Let's say you're running your actual systems on bare metal, but your DRP is virtual. Have you seen anybody hit problems because of that?
It's
I'm
one of
guessing
those.
it's probably not a problem. Or I'm guessing there aren't that many, but I want to know.
It's not that there's not that many. Actually, there's quite a few virtual SharePoint environments. More and more. My current guess is that we're somewhere around 50% virtual, even in the production space.
No, what I'm saying is exactly that. I'm seeing a lot of virtual. It doesn't sound like there are a lot of issues that people are hitting.
No, I would say on the SQL side that people do run into it, especially with, say, the search databases and from an indexing perspective. If they run into it on the SharePoint side, it's usually the index server. But when they use dedicated disks, they can overcome some of those I/O issues.
Okay.
But with SharePoint these days, we are finding it's almost easier to manage, easier to address a lot of the issues simply by running those web front ends virtual. But it doesn't necessarily mean that you need less resources, and those are the common mistakes, is people that try and squeeze resources out of it because it's virtual now.
Yeah, and possibly don't manage or sort of maintain the boxes to the same extent because it's it's not a physical. They can't go and tap on it, so they think we don't really need to keep an eye on it as much.
Yes.
So but in terms of DRP, certainly it's a good approach to use a
Yeah,
virtual.
definitely.
Spin them up and do your DRP, shut them down.
Yep. I think as well, disaster recovery is a little bit different, and a lot of that hasn't necessarily been documented. A lot of it's trial and error. You can't just simply roll back a server in a production environment, and I think that might be some of the mistakes that are made. There's not a lot of configuration information on a web front end, but there's a lot more than you think there is, especially in a SQL environment. It's so transactional. You can't just roll back a server, a full server. And I think that's some of the lessons learned when you start messing with a server that has problems and you start trying to roll it back because... But a really good example of that is, let's say you're installing a SharePoint hotfix. There is no uninstall for SharePoint hotfix. There's no uninstall for a service pack in SharePoint. But if you've got if it's virtual, you may want to use that option, right? You might want to feel like I just installed a hotfix and I'm having serious issues. I need to roll back, and so you're going to feel like you're going to want to use that, and it's one of those things where there's not a lot of guidance around it.
I mean, Hyper-V does give you some capability there with the ability to save state and stuff like that.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that you can't. I'm just saying that it's one of those things where it's untested. You're in a state where you're deciding personally if you think it's worth being able to roll back before the hotfix versus moving forward and, repairing it or whatever from there on. Yeah,
and I think also with a depending on, and I'm talking a little bit out of turn, you'll know a lot more about this than I would, but I'm kind of more on the dev side than the infrastructure side. But if you roll out a patch or a hotfix for SharePoint, it may be updating some of the XML files on the server, but it may also very well be modifying things in the database.
In fact, it does, right?
Like that,
it does. In fact, there's entries of the version in the database, and any hotfix, almost without exception, there's two major pieces. There's the binary upgrade, and then there's the database upgrade. Maybe it's not new schema, but at least it's going to update the version number. The version number, exactly.
Yeah, so if you can't just simply roll back the changes on your front end, your database is still been touched.
It's not all done, yeah.
So what advice would you give to people to maybe patching for the first time? They've just installed SharePoint recently and they're having to upgrade to Service Pack 2, for example.
It's one of those things where you have to test that stuff in pre-production. There needs to be an environment where you can get comfortable with hotfixes or service packs. It's definitely an area where that documentation, you need to consume it. I think a lot of people who are used to Microsoft products, they're in this mode of try it first, and then if it fails, then read the documentation. And with the SharePoint service packs, it needs to be opposite. You need to read the docs and then try it in pre-production. Get used to it, get used to the feel. Then when you're comfortable with it, then you're doing it on a single server and then, rolling it out subsequently. But another gotcha is that thing where if your servers are not on the same version your database is, it's that funniness that you get, right? Where it doesn't want to render if it's not on the same version. Like if your databases are essentially newer.
Yeah, things just get out of sync.
Mm-hmm.
Not uncommon.
Not uncommon.
Not uncommon. Well, maybe let's transition out into a different topic we wanted to touch on. I mentioned earlier that we were going to maybe see how we get to failed deployments, because you made an interesting point also just earlier in the evening. And now we're saying it again. SharePoint's not a normal, in inverted commas. It's not a normal Microsoft product. It's not a Microsoft Word or even a server product. It's a big beast. It's big. It's got a lot of moving parts.
It's big, and those who dismiss it as just another Microsoft product, or you just run through the wizard and you can figure it out as you go, it's not that straightforward. And I'm not saying that it's crazy hard. I'm saying it's something that you grow with and you learn how it behaves, and it's going to be a challenge at times, but it'll pay off. The time you invest in it pays off.
You just need to know what to expect. It's not a single purpose application.
Yeah,
because of that, it makes it more complex.
And like I was mentioning to you earlier in the night, it's compared to Facebook all the way to SAP. There's no other products that exist that are compared to Facebook all the way to SAP. I mean, it's so much to so many people that it tries to be everything to everyone. And I commonly call SharePoint plastic because it can do so many things, and it can be modeled and molded into whatever you want it to do. But if you don't know what you need it to do, you're ultimately going to have some problems, because it can do so many things. And when other people start twisting the knobs, you get into these bad situations where it is nothing to anybody because it becomes unusable.
So governance, probably the key term.
Governance is the term.
You mentioned it earlier, but it comes up all the time, and it's really...
Yeah, it is, and I think that it's commonly the adage around policies and vision and roles and responsibilities and getting the right visibility to what it needs to be doing, and from the top-down approach to the bottom-up approach, and structured versus unstructured. There's a lot of information architecture that goes undone in some companies.
We discussed that a little bit in the panel discussion, which people will, I think, actually be... that episode will be coming out before this one.
Okay.
The panel that we had at TechEd.
Yeah.
And we raised it also in the user adoption panel as well, which I also would recommend people listen to. We've said that a lot of deployments in that session, we discussed that a lot of deployments fail largely for user adoption reasons, and a lot of them also just because people don't have the planning. They kind of roll out SharePoint somewhere in the organization to do one small thing, and then suddenly it gets dragged into everything else.
Yeah.
Without the appropriate planning and policies.
Definitely. And it's not only a challenge for those who ran it in that department. Now IT is being force-fed some deployment, and they're saying, you need to turn this into the corporate deployment, or you need to support this application. IT never wants to be surprised by applications they need to support. They don't like being surprised. They like to have things being dial tone, and that's how they win. They win when people don't notice they're there. Or enabling new scenarios. They like to build new things, but they like to do it in their time.
Yeah, sure.
They don't like these under the radar shadow applications that exist.
SharePoint's a pretty big shadow application.
SharePoint's pretty big to be a shadow app.
So you mentioned also as part of that you've seen a lot of failed deployments, and you wanted to chat a little bit about it as part of this episode. Maybe give people some advice or some things to look out for or things to avoid when to try and avoid failed SharePoint projects.
Yeah. And part of this goes into governance, and I do encourage people to drill into that stuff. I don't really want to spend a lot of time here on that particular topic, but I do think that more and more there's some roles and responsibilities that are being defined that are important to the SharePoint team. One of the unappreciated SharePoint people is the project manager. We need to identify this person who's actually going to keep us on scope, this person who's going to help identify the dates and the timelines for how things need to be scoped and rolled out, and also mitigate this conflict between the developers and IT. As well, it's this stakeholder committee. How do we get the right visibility so that in today's economic climate, we get the right budget for SharePoint and what we're doing in the project? And the other one is it needs to be quick wins. There's so many SharePoint deployments that go off, they play under the radar, it's everything to everyone, and nobody knows what it's doing and why it's doing it, but it's mission critical. And when it's down, they notice it. When it's not, it's just something that people have to support, and so they get upset about it. So what I'm saying is it's finding those key critical applications that it can do well, whether it's profiles or search or a portal or dashboards or KPIs, whatever it is. It's getting wins that the stakeholders, these business people, can clearly identify the business value and what they get out of it.
And when they do that, they're likely to allocate enough budget to get it up and running properly.
Exactly.
The right hardware and the right...
Yeah, and a lot of what I want to see is more and more people kind of feeling this, appreciating SharePoint for what it is and what it can be, that flexibility. And yeah, there's developer challenges and so on around it, and I think we can see that Microsoft's headed in the right direction. One of the things I like to see people do more is this roadmap. Microsoft has a roadmap, but does your company have a roadmap for what they want to do with SharePoint? I think that's a kind of key thing going forward is in understanding adoption, well, how do you get out of ahead of adoption, understand where it needs to go? And in that roadmap, having milestones that are those quick wins. These are things we need to do to help the business see the value.
Yeah, that's a good tip. Good advice. Okay, so that's some good tips, Joel. I think we're pretty much running out of time here, and I know you've got a big party that you want to get back to with some of the other SharePoint guys here, wrapping up your last night here in Cape Town. I don't want to take too much more of your time, but maybe let's just ask you quickly, what's next for SharePoint, Joel? What's next on the horizon, and where are we going to find you next, and so on?
Well, my next big trip is I'm in Asia in September. I'm headed to Japan and Singapore and Penang for an MVP conference thing. I'm in India for a couple different user groups. And ultimately that's going to be a around the world trip where I actually circumnavigate the whole thing. So
are you doing the whole thing
exciting.
in a hot air balloon? Or
That sounds like a challenge.
Okay. I could actually see Joel doing that. We'd see some YouTube videos. Okay, so yeah, going to be going around again.
Yeah,
getting some retinal photos, eh?
Right. I haven't been to India yet, so that'll be fun.
Yeah,
spending a week in India with Michael Knoll, who also has a very similar interest in travel.
Okay, great. That should be a good trip.
Yeah.
I look forward to the blogs and the photos coming up soon.
Yeah, and then I'm off to SharePoint conference in October. Definitely looking forward to seeing everybody there. Can't wait. I mean, that's going to be such a huge reunion, seeing everybody and getting the big scoop and just seeing everybody's reaction to that.
Yeah, that should be good. I'm going to be missing that one, unfortunately. Very sad about that, but it's just the way things work out. But that should be a good event.
Yeah, and the other thing, I've really been to Twitter and social networks and that kind of thing, and so out of the SharePoint conference, I just expect it really to explode even more in the SharePoint community because of those who aren't there are really going to be wanting to know what's going on, and so we're going to see just a serious wild communication on the SharePoint conference with Twitter.
Yeah,
so definitely tap into SharePoint conference whether you're there or not, and ask us what's going on.
Yeah, I know you've managed to get Eric quite keen on some of the social networking stuff. He's Eric Harlan recently signed up to Facebook and he's looking for friends. So everybody join up and be friends with Eric Harlan on Facebook.
That's funny.
All right, cool, Joel. Thanks again for your time. That was great. Some interesting discussions, some important points, and some important tips to look out for keeping your environment up and running, and obviously planning as well for 2010. So thanks for your time.
And I'm doing a webcast in the next couple of weeks on preparing to upgrade your environment to SharePoint 2010, which again is not NDA stuff. It's about emphasis on helping you prepare your environment today, just so you'll be ready for 2010 when it's available.
So we'll see some of these tools in action.
That's right.
That's great.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks again.
Thanks.
Out the window, everybody keep on fading out. Gone out the window, everybody keep on fading out.
If you've got any questions about any of the ideas discussed in this episode, or you'd like to give other feedback, like show topics or requests, then mail us at feedback@TheMossShow.com. To access the archives of all of our shows, browse to www.themossShow.com or www.TheMossShow.com.